I'm Glenn Denny, and welcome to another edition of Circle Time, the Early Years podcast. My guest for this edition is a consultant and trainer with over 25 years of experience in early years. They specialize in creating nurturing environments for children's growth and development using their vast experience as a trauma-informed practitioner. Welcome to Circle Time, Teresa Robinson.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm really excited to be here. So I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, thank you. No, we really pleased to have you with us. So, first of all, tell us a little bit about your background and where you've kind of started from and to where you are now, really, your sort of journey.
Well, I started in early years, 25 years ago, as a parent helper, and just sort of found my way in the sector. Didn't actually seek it out. I just found my way in the sector because my daughters were small and I was in a small preschool. Started to help out. Then I started to train. I ended up running and managing that preschool. And then it just sort of evolved from there. And then I ended up 25 years later, a nursery lead in a primary school in Devon. So it's been, quite a journey, but not one I specifically chose. It just evolved. Yeah.
It almost chose you, really, didn't it?
It did. Yes, most definitely. I didn't expect it. I didn't know 25 years ago that this is where I would be now. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. So for me, it was like, this is what I wanted to do. But it's interesting. You were kind of like the usual kind of thing, like the parent helper brought in and then, just worked your way through it. But
absolutely. And it just became an absolute passion and it never waned. It just got stronger. And I think because you grow and you develop, and as you evolve in your role and in your practice, however, all the various roles that you undertake, it exposes you to new experiences and you want to look into those more. And then because I am a bit of a nerd anyway, it sort of really fed into that for me. And I was able to sort of explore things that I found incredibly interesting and then just took myself on. And now I'm here now and founder of No Pencil Required. Yeah.
I love that name because honestly, the amount of times you're like, yes, we'll get the children to do worksheets and like, no, please don't.
I have nothing against pencils. I absolutely love all writing implements, I have to say. But I do believe that actually, if you want really successful lifelong learners, then it's all those important skills that come before they even need to pick up a pencil. It's all those really, if you get those foundations right, then you have motivated little learners who want to do the best. Yeah.
Absolutely. So one thing I was kind of interested in is like the trauma-informed practitioner part that, I was reading about for you. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that came off the back of my own personal journey of exploring and becoming a accredited life coach. I was going down that route and it opened up all those sorts of things. And I was looking on my own. I was able to reflect it on my own practice as a nursery teacher and recognizing sort of the correlation between the two. And I was really interested in how I could sort of bring it down to a level where it was more associated with children. And then I found the course and I just went into it, and it just really underpins everything that you don't recognize that you're doing. I think sometimes that when we're in our roles, we just do our jobs. And I don't mean that in a throwaway way. I mean actually we get so used to what we're doing, we don't recognize the skills that we've got, and we don't recognize all the little nuances that are having an impact, whether negative or positive, on our children every day. So when I started to train as a trauma-informed practitioner, it really did highlight lots of things that I think actually I was doing already and my team were doing already, but actually how we could change our phrasing, how we could soften our postures, how we could become safe places in ourselves. And it just sort of evolved from that. And you just sort of recognize the bits that you're doing and how you can make those better, and the things that you're not doing. And then, where you think you're doing the best thing, because everybody always comes with the best of intention, but actually you can make a situation worse. Yeah.
Oh, no,
so
that
identify that.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's that bit. Yeah, I was saying, like, thinking about it whilst you were talking there, it's like we do our jobs not on autopilot, but by instinct. And like, a child's upset and you want to help them and you want to know why. It's just things that we do.
Yes.
But we don't recognize that actually this is what it's part of.
Yes, exactly. And sometimes as well, inadvertently, if a child is upset, we can try and placate them by saying, oh, it's okay, you're okay, because we want to make them feel better. But actually, inadvertently, we're not making them feel better because they're obviously not okay. Do you know? So it's like little things like that that actually help you recognize how you can, it's just validating the children so that it's changing your phrasing and how you approach and respond to certain situations, that children then can feel seen and heard, and their feelings are validated, and acknowledging. And it could be, oh, you're really upset. So it could be just a simple change of phrase that makes all the difference to that child, rather than, oh, you're okay, you're all right, because they're obviously not. Do you know what I mean? You're doing it in a loving way, but actually inadvertently you're sort of dismissing what's happening to them and how they're feeling in that moment. And I know that sounds quite pedantic. I don't mean it to be quite pedantic, because these sort of things happen all the time and we can't be on it 24/7. It's just not possible. We're not going to get it right 100% of the time. But is that awareness of what you're saying and how you're saying it, or how you're approaching something, that makes all the difference.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's empowering the children with the words that they need to describe what's happening, what they're feeling.
Absolutely.
So that kind of led you on as well. Like that was a nice little segue there into developing a course was it for practitioners to deliver to children, or was it to be delivered to children?
Well, I've developed several courses. My most recent one is Neuronavigators, which is about bringing the concepts of brain science to help develop and provide emotional and behavioral support. So, and I'm a great believer of including children in what's happening. Because I think if you empower them, if you tell them what is happening and what is going on, then they have an opportunity to respond to that. So it sort of falls on the back of the pedagogy, because No Pencil Required is a pedagogy I sort of developed. I didn't know it was called No Pencil Required until 2 years ago. But on the back of that, I've created the Conscious Practitioner course, which is where the practitioner is very aware of their role, because children are always, we're very child-centered and children come first. And I'm not sort of bringing away from that, but I really believe that the teachers and the practitioners actually come first, because I think if you aren't in the best place, you can't give your best for those children. So it's not to say that the children aren't, it's really close. I'm not bringing away from the children at all, but I really do believe that actually you are so valuable in your roles, and you don't give yourself enough sort of praise or recognition for what you bring. And we get caught up in everything that comes on, and the stress that brings that. Well, you have explained earlier on, yourself, you've experienced it this week, and that's just a norm. You just get on with that, but it takes its toll. And I think the conscious practitioner really does highlight you and how important you are, and ways to take care of yourself so that you can give your best. You can be the best teacher version of you. Yeah.
And that is super important as well, because if we're not taking that time for ourselves, and we do as a staff team as well, we talk about that. In fact, one of my team is also one that nags me to make sure you had your break, because I'm terrible. I will make sure that they're okay, but actually am I okay?
Yeah. I
don't tend to think about that as well. So I suppose it's highlighting the fact that every single individual within that setting is important, children and adults alike.
Yeah, and and because you've got such an important role and you want to look after everybody, if you're not filling your own cup, you're not going to be able to look after everybody the way that you want to, or it's going to cost you in order to give to them. And that's not to say that they're not worthy of that, but actually it's that change in that mindset of actually it's not selfish to put yourself first if it means that you're giving more to others, and it's changing that, because we can feel guilty about that. And we shouldn't feel guilty about that. It's really important that we look after ourselves, because we cannot give what we want to give to others if we don't do that. It's that thing, isn't it? You've got to fill your own cup. Yeah,
definitely. Absolutely. So tell us, you mentioned a little bit about Neuronavigators there. Tell us a little bit more about this one. This sounds quite exciting, because I do love a bit about brain science and neuroscience. That's kind of my little excitement part. But I'm learning so much about it.
Do you know, this just makes me feel so good. I just love this so much. And I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not a neurobiologist. I'm not. I'm just a nursery teacher, an ex-nursery teacher from Devon, who believes in helping children to just not be misunderstood. And I really believe that like I was saying earlier, autonomy and self-advocacy for children is so important, because so much is done to children with our routines and our expectations. The chivvied here, the chivvied there. We're going to do this activity. We're going to join in. There's very little that they get to choose for themselves. But neuronavigators, and because we now know, I support a lot of teachers and practitioners, and I am, a lot of messages all the time of behavior seems to be, getting more challenging and more tricky. It's really difficult for children, for teachers and practitioners to be able to support the children in the best of ways. So if you can do it in a way that actually the children are, given ownership, they're given the understanding, and we can do, and I know this works because now I've developed this course. I recognize the practice that I did with my children in my class. We did, it wasn't called neuronavigators then. We just built our bodies and brains, and they knew what was happening inside of them. They recognized, it was like you said earlier about giving them the language to identify what's happening in order for them to be able to recognize it and do something about it. So it just builds on that. So it's a 3-tier system. It's actually a whole primary school program. So we've got the brain buds, which are your nursery reception. We've got your, do you know what? My brain's gone. Let me just read. I've got it written down here. The Brain Builders Club is Key Stage 1. And then we've got the Thought Transformers, which is Key Stage 2. So it's at different levels of understanding so that you can actually reach those children. So from tiny 3-year-olds, you can start introducing the concepts, but it's getting them to understand, how things are presenting in their bodies. When we've got children who are throwing things, doesn't necessarily mean because they're angry, they could be scared. Do you know what I mean? It's recognizing why they're presenting the way that they're presenting, and helping them understand. And certainly, I think if we can help children understand that there's nothing wrong with them, they're not broken, it's just their brains trying to keep them safe. And if we can show them how to do that and give them the tools with which to recognize and respond and deal with that, we teach them those amazing self-regulation skills everybody goes on about, because we can co-regulate with them in a really great way. So these, it's really interactive. We give them concepts to understand. And then if we get that from young, and then the children as they go through the school, if that's fostered all the way through the school, then, the level of anxiety will drop, because children will know what's happening. They'll be able to recognize it. Will have such a sort of transcendent effect on them in their life learning and success, not just in their school learning and success. And I think, and then when you think about then, when they go on to teenage years, they would have had that grounding, and it will really set them up for what's to come.
It's interesting that you said about teenagers as well. And I think that's part of it, because we haven't really taken the time. We've gone through this process, I've been doing this for almost 27 years. And you've been doing the same. And it wasn't really talked about. It wasn't that thing. It's like, it was almost like, oh, well, you'll be fine. On you go, move along now. But actually, it's kind of stunted a little bit with older children and teenagers, that they don't actually know how to describe how they're feeling. So starting now, as early as we can, to sort of name it and, describe what it's feeling and what it's about, actually talking about emotions is super important. I know some people think, oh, well, it's all a bit airy fairy, but actually it's so important, because we're in this colossal bag of stuff that just walks around. And if we don't understand what's going on in our own body, then how can we expect children to kind of regulate themselves? Because they can't. It's impossible.
No, absolutely. And it's really important as well that, that we develop it through connection and compassion and kindness and relationship, because trust is really key. Children need to feel safe in order for them to be able to be what you want them to be. And if you've got children who are coming in, you can have children who come from really nurturing environments, really loving families, who actually have had everything done and they've never had to experience anything negative or have to solve a problem, who then can't cope because they have, they're not able to do, they discover that, and I don't mean this in a horrible way, because we revere our children, we absolutely adore them, and we think that they are the most amazing things, and they come in with that, and because young children are naturally egotistical anyway. But when they then recognize, actually, well, mummy and daddy have said I'm amazing, I can do anything, but I'm stuck here, and they haven't had any skills in order to develop that, then that can have an impact just as much as children who've had a dysregulated background, who have been given the most awful names and have had the most awful experiences, who come in so guarded that they cannot develop a relationship of trust because adults don't bring that. Why would they even begin that? So they come in with it's different types of resilience, really. You know, they've got the resilience from the dysregulated when they've got to treat themselves safe, and it's a really negative thing. And then there's a lack of resilience from the ones who have had everything done because they've been loved so much that they've never had to experience anything. So it's developing opportunities for building that trust and that level of safety, because when children, it comes down to three things pretty much. When children do experience sort of big baffling behaviors, it is a lack of a connection, a lack of feeling of safety, and regulation. And regulation as well, I think that gets confused because regulation isn't calm. It isn't about being calm. It's about being in control of what's happening to you, and you can't control it if you don't know what it is. So Neuronavigators helps children identify what it is, so that it helps to build on self-regulation. It gives them really great tools in which to do that. And the beautiful thing about everything that I do, all aspects of No Pencil Required, is you don't need any extra resources for it. I'm a huge believer that everything you have is right there with you. It's in you, it's in those children. You don't need to laminate anything, you don't need to plan anything, you don't need to print anything. It's just taking the time to understand it. And then it's like having this toolbox filled with stuff that you can just pull out at times of transition, at times of children who are experiencing big feelings, at time of great times, of tricky times. You just have this tool of stuff that you can just pull out and give a go and see if it's going to work. But just by understanding what's happening in front of you.
I think that's another important thing as well, about the understanding yourself. I mean, what I was lucky enough, I did the sort of the level 2, the introduction to neuroscience course. And I'm so glad I did, because I was working with 2-year-olds at the time, and 2-year-olds happen to be my favorite age group. I love them to pieces. They're just this baffling array of, this.
There's a lot of wow-wees, isn't it, when you're 2?
Oh my goodness, yeah, so much going on with them. It's just amazing. But sometimes, like, when their behavior just, to borrow a phrase, when they kick off, I understand what's going on with them. And I'm like, okay, do I understand what's going on? But I found that actually by taking that time, so like you were saying there about building our own skills and our own knowledge, that by building my knowledge about what's going on with their heads and their emotions and the sort of the lack of regulation and everything, that really helped me to understand. So the next time one of the 2-year-olds had a fit about something, somebody took something off them and they threw themselves on the ground, instead of going, "Now you're okay, we're just going to share," and all that, which I've previously done, and I will hold my hands up and say, yes, I did that, but I didn't know any better at the time.
Well, this is it. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And then the thing is, though, is when you discover what you don't know, you start to know what you don't know, and that can make you feel really uncomfortable. So you have two choices then. You can decide to get comfortable being uncomfortable and do something about it, or you get comfortable and you go back to safety and you carry on doing what you were doing. Yeah. But there's a great quote by Henry Ford, and it's, "If you always do what you've always done, you always get what you've always got." So when you've got people who are constantly up against, if we say, explosive behaviors, big behaviors, and they keep on doing the same old thing and it's not working, then there comes a point of where do you go from here? Do you keep on, knocking against the buffer, or do you actually go, do you know what, we need to do something about this? Because it takes the same amount of energy to deal with the fallout as it does to put the steps in place. The reason it feels harder is because it's new and it's different, and you have to be hyper aware of it, and that makes it feel like it's really hard. It's not, it's just different. So it's changing that mindset. That's the conscious practitioner. That's you as the teacher, changing that mindset around that and recognizing that there's nothing wrong with what you're doing. It just feels really hard because it's really new and you're hyper aware of it as you bring that in. But get comfortable with that, and it soon becomes the way that you do it. And the beautiful thing about that is when you start changing your approach like that, everybody's watching you. You know, you don't need training programs and I don't mean that in a horrible sense, because I do training programs, but actually you become such a role model. You become a role model for your colleagues because they start picking up on the nuances, and the children see you. They see you respond to those children who may normally have a negative label, may normally have real difficulties forming friendships in their peer groups. But when they see you respond with kindness and compassion and understanding, and you use that language, you know, yeah, they're really struggling right now, they just need an extra bit of love, and they hear that and they see that, it teaches them that that's what they do, because you're going to treat them exactly the same. You know, you foster those communities of, everybody wants those classroom communities that actually have this great ethos of kindness and friendship and compassion, understanding. But children don't know these concepts because, well, why would they? They need to see those concepts. They may not know the labels for them, but they need to see the actions in order for them to be what it is we tell them to be. No, don't hit your friends, use kind hands. Okay, what does that actually mean? Do you know what I mean? It's really how you respond is how they'll respond. And then the child who's having the most difficulty will have this classroom filled of kind souls who are doing their best to understand. And that doesn't mean no boundaries. It doesn't mean that, you know, that there aren't expectations, because, you know, you want socially adept individuals. You want them to understand what the expectations are in your settings. But boundaries aren't consequences. There's just a different debate, but a big difference there too.
No, absolutely. I mean, so that particular child, when I adjusted my practice, my attitude was, well, I'm not going to tell them to, give it back because they took something off. So they were having their meltdown. So I just lay down next to them. And that's all I did. I didn't say straight away. I just lay down next to them. And then when they calmed down, I said, would you like a cuddle?
Yeah.
Got a cuddle, and they calmed right down. And then we talked about it, because we had to acknowledge what had happened.
Yes.
And I think that was very important. But it was one of those bits that, if we're reflecting on how we are as practitioners, and when we realize, like, something's not right here, what do I need to change? And then you look at other things and I'm a big advocate for CPD and ongoing learning, because never ever stop. The whole landscape of early years changes so often, and like the way children are as well, I feel they change as well, because society changes, so their attitudes change and parenting styles change and everything else. So we have to keep changing, we have to keep adapting.
Absolutely. And I think as well, we're exposed to so much more, and everything's more accessible. So there's lots of things on social media, and there's so much, it can become a bit of a noise too, and it's hard to know what to do for the best. And we take little bits, and when we think, well, actually this doesn't work, this is just rubbish, this is just nonsense, this is airy-fairy, without recognizing what's going on behind it or what it actually really means. We just see something and we think, oh, actually, we're going to try that. I've been guilty of that. It's just, we all do. And it's just making sense of the noise and actually recognizing what's really important. I created something that I call the No Pencil Required lens, and it helps you see the wow behind the ordinary. And it just helps you to, look at, instead of seeing what you can see, is actually, what can I see? You just look that little bit behind, a little bit behind, exactly like you said, because when you've got a child who is as dysregulated as that, they're not going to hear you. There is nothing that you can do or say that is going to get through to that child. You're just adding fuel to the fire. And I'm sure that there are loads of people listening that would know that. But actually, when you're caught in the moment, and because you want to keep everybody safe and you want to stop it from happening because you feel so uncomfortable, because, it's triggering something in you, and so you don't like it and you want it to stop, that actually it takes longer to stop because you're inadvertently, by trying your best, you're making it worse.
I think that's it. I think that was the sort of the changing moment for me, when I eventually realized it's like I'm constantly talking at them. And I will honestly say that phrase, I was talking at them. I wasn't talking to them, I was talking at them. And it just wasn't working. So that's when I had to change my practice, because it wasn't meeting their needs.
No. And we do it, it's just And we're not going to do, it's easy to sit here and talk about all the things that are so wonderful and that we should do, but we're human. We got to talk about life, and there are so many things that get chucked at us, and we're not going to get it right all of the time. We got to cut ourselves some slack. That is okay. But if you know that you are aware and you are doing your very best, that's all anybody can do. Is that actually in those moments when you are ultimately aware and you really are on it and you get it right, that those are wins. And it gives you a really good balance, because the more of you that do that, and then you've got, like I said, you're the role model, the more of your team that do that, how many successes is that in a week? And it's actually recognizing all the little positive bits that you do.
Yeah, I definitely think that. I mean, after doing the course, some of my colleagues, I was talking to them about what I'd learned and everything else and how I was putting into practice, and they were watching, and it's like, okay, it's a different approach. And part of my role this was in my previous setting, not in my current setting, but in my previous setting, I was what was called the advanced skills practitioner, which was my fancy job title for the fact I'm old and I know stuff. That's the way I describe it, because it's the easiest way of describing what my job title was. But staff would watch me and like, well, what's this about? Or they come and ask me stuff. And that's where, like you say, it's like being that role model for other team members. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, this is what I've learned, and this is what I'm discovering from it. This is what's not working for me. This is what I'm putting in place to try and change my work, and what I do.
And it's hard as well, because, change is difficult. Not everybody likes change. And you can have, you can be incredibly skilled. I thought myself as a really skilled teacher until I went to a PE class and I realized how inept some of these children that I'd sent them off. And I thought I'd done a really good job. And it really upset me to think actually that, I hadn't set them up for this PE class as well as I thought I'd done. And that really got me on a bit of a journey. But I think we can be incredibly skilled, and I'm not taking that away from anybody. We can have so much experience, and you can be incredibly good at what you do, but because it becomes like a routine. You don't have to think. Mm-hmm. It just becomes what you do. And the danger of that is then, even though it may work, all your cohorts are different. Everything that they bring with them each time is different. So even though your approach remains the same, it's going to land differently on who you've got. And that's why you're going to have bigger roller coaster bumps, because if you're not prepared to think or step up and think more about what's going on in front of you, you're still going to get those buffers, and it's going to become a really unpleasant experience. And I would put money on everybody listening to this, everybody in early years, they don't want to be that type of practitioner. But that's not what they're there for. They're not that type of teacher. They want their children to have the best learning experiences, but sometimes we can get in our own way and not recognize when it's down to us to make the difference.
I think it's that bit about routine. When everything starts to become routine, you should really question, why is it routine?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's nothing wrong with routines and because they can provide security, and children can know what's happening next, which is great. But if you're so rigid in, not in just your day-to-day routine, but in the way that you practice stuff with if you've been doing the same job for 20 years and every September, this is how you do it like this, and your plans start the same way, your children coming in aren't the same children as last year or 10 years ago. And like you were saying, children and society and parenting has altered so much that there are massive changes coming through. There are such discrepancies with children's capabilities and understanding and levels of development coming through that have all been impacted on COVID, which we can't excuse, that has had a massive impact. But there's less playtime, there's less, there's more screen time, and we've got to recognize actually that is the sign of the time. That is where we are right now. And what worked 5-10 years ago, as great as they're out there, and some of those things might work today, but they're not all going to work. So it's how can what is it that you need to do in order to be able to use what you know to support what you don't know and make those changes and be ready to do that. Yeah,
I think so. I mean, it was funny. You just brought back a memory to me there of a setting that I used to kind of visit quite regularly. And it was that bit where it was kind of their security blanket. It would be the same type of planning. And I could literally guarantee if I went to visit them every couple of years at the same time of year, the same display board would be up. And it would be exactly the same carbon copies of everything. There was no individuality. And it was just down to, I don't know whether it was down to their lack of experience, because they'd all been doing it for forever. but maybe that's the problem. They were doing it
Yes.
so it just became their security blanket. This is what we're doing at this time of year. And there was no change in what they were doing to meet the needs of the children that they had at the time. And I think it's that hugely important bit that we need to look at our individual children. And I'm a big believer that in my own setting, that every single child that comes to us is different. And luckily, the team that I've got with me are totally on board with that we don't do massive loads of planning, because it's not what we're about. We don't know what the children are going to want to do from one to the next. So we go with that. And I think it was difficult for them at first, but they made the change, because I slowly explained to them and kind of modeled it. It's like, children are going to change what their minds are set on every 5 minutes, and you can't plan so far in advance, but you can do little invitations and provocations and things like that and see where they go with it. Just don't be precious about it. Let them run with it and see where it goes.
I think so. And I think sometimes as well, we hear the topic understanding the world. I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about this. I believe, and I don't dispute that actually it's really nice to expose children to other experiences, but actually for children to understand abstract and outside of their world, you need to teach them understanding their world. And it's right meeting them where they are right in that moment. So I think it's understanding their world before they can have any concept of understanding the world, because they need to know who they are and where they fit. It's all about identity and where they are in that space. And their world right now is their classroom, their family, where they are in that environment, where they are in that moment. And I think because they do live in the moment, excuse me, as much as we try and think not, they are very much in that moment. And it's not to say that we can't give them wonderful experiences, but we got to understand when we introduce those experiences, one, who we're doing it for, and what are they going to get from that if they are still not really making sense of where they are and why they're doing what they're doing at that moment. And I think understanding their world comes before understanding the world.
That makes absolute sense to me as well, because we mentioned it earlier that children are essentially egocentric beings.
Yes,
that's what they are. That is their programming, to if you like, that their world basically revolves around them. So that is currently their world, and we need to understand that and go with that to help them understand that actually there's more beyond that, to look beyond it to see what there is. But
and
we
most of that
be with them first.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I overspoke you. I do apologize. But I think once you recognize that and then realize actually understanding their world and beyond that is actually how they can get on with the person that's next to them in that room. That takes them beyond that world. If they're in that moment and they're right there, how they relate to that person who's right next to them on that chair is extending that world, because you want to develop those personal and interpersonal skills. You want to develop, when you talk about empathy and understanding with it, those are massive things that come way down the line, but you can start, and that's where it comes to modeling. Like you were saying, like you model the way that you want to approach things with your children. And that's exactly the thing that you do in order for them to start to evolve outside of that, really, because it's really small and we don't give it thought, perhaps. Or not enough thought in order for them. We just assume they're going to get on now. Right, we're going to come over here now. We're going to do this now. We're going to line up over here. We're going to have carpet time. And for the most part, they just get along and they have a really nice time and they enjoy it. But for those, those children who find that difficult, if we're not recognizing where they are in that moment, then we can be creating situations that we could actually avoid.
Absolutely. Well, Teresa, unfortunately, time is against us and we've reached the end of this podcast. But thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely amazing.
I've loved it. Thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed talking with you this evening, Glenn.
Thank you. Teresa Robinson, thank you.
Take care.